Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Hilaal Live. My name is Faraz Patel. I would like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us. I'd also like to thank my colleague Luqman Shadrack for taking you through that first part of the show. It's good to have you back, of course, after the 12 days of Rabiul Awwal. Now, struggle stalwart and foreign affairs chief Aziz Pahad passed away last night at the age of 82. Pahad served as the Democratic South Africa's first foreign affairs deputy minister and served on both the national executive of the ANC and the central committee of the South African Communist Party in the mid-80s. Joining us now to discuss the life of Aziz Pahad is Professor of Political Science at UNISA, Professor Dirk Kotze. Professor Kotze, good evening and thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Professor, when we speak of Aziz Pahad, he was one of those few that really started the rallying against the apartheid government in outside, of course, the African continent. And he did so with a lot of aggression, but also made sure that the support rallied overseas was there for all to see.
Yes, we all know he was in exile with his brother, and that they together worked very closely. They had a very close relationship with President Thabo Mbeki also. And they studied together in the UK. So there's a very long history and connection between them. He was always interested in international relations, also political economy. You would refer to his membership of the Communist Party. But in the end, his main focus remained right through his political career on international relations, foreign policy, and matters related to that. So whether it was in exile or when he returned after 1990, that was his specialization, his focus area.
Prof, he also really excelled during the tenure of President Nelson Mandela in making sure that South Africa's relations with many across the globe was built quite strongly, because he really was that central point in making sure that when he was the representative of South Africa, he did so quite well.
Yes, he was a key person from the start. The minister then was Minister of Foreign Affairs. Then was Alfred Mzo, the former Secretary General of the ANC. They knew each other very well, and therefore, because he was in a sense more of the specialist in this field, he was the power behind the scenes. He was the one who worked very closely right from the start when President Mbeki was the deputy president. From that point onwards, he was closely aligned with President Mbeki, who at that stage already, during the Mandela administration, focused a lot on international relations and the relations with African countries in general. There was a very strong core group, and another person who assisted them very, very well is Lilian Tlapu, the first ambassador of South Africa to the Organization of African Unity, which later in 2002 became the African Union. And he and the Deputy Minister, Aziz Pahad, they formed a very close partnership, a very close friendship also. And I think a lot about African policies during that time, not so much the symbolic part of it, but more the diplomacy behind the scenes were done by them.
Prof, when you talk of loyalty and you speak about, and it's quite well known, his relationship with former President Thabo Mbeki. And I want to obviously go back to 2008, when the recalling of President Mbeki as the president of South Africa. And you saw then that Aziz Pahad decided, look, I'm not going to have anything to do with government anymore. I myself am relieving from this organization. That just showed his loyalty, didn't it, to President Mbeki, because it wasn't a loyalty that had started during, of course, democracy. It was a loyalty that really did stretch from the time of apartheid.
Yes, that is very much correct. And I think what distinguishes him from, for example, those who started COPE, the Congress of the People, is that he didn't leave the ANC, but he left government. He resigned together with those who joined COPE or who formed COPE. At the same time, in 2008, when President Mbeki was recalled by the ANC, and he did not abandon the ANC, but he moved away from the ANC in terms of an active participation. He was never very close to President Zuma, although President Zuma later on appointed him as an envoy of the president for the Middle East, and especially with regard to the Palestinian situation. So he did later on came closer back to the government component of the ANC, but in the first number of years after 2008, he maintained quite a distance away from those then in government, or first the new ANC leadership and then the government after that.
Prof, you speak about him, of course, being an envoy to for the Middle East, and I want to talk especially with regards to what is happening, of course, in Palestine, because the ANC has a very close relationship with Palestine in terms of wanting the liberation of that part of the Middle East, and the importance of having Aziz Pahad there, given that he had that tremendous knowledge of foreign affairs and, of course, global politics as a whole.
Yes, he was possibly the best person or the best qualified person in order to play that role. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long because the global politics sort of overtook some of the initiatives that he wanted to get going, to launch on behalf of the South African government in general. There were some discussions between the Israelis and the Palestinians slightly earlier, actually, here in South Africa. So there were some of these initiatives that become visible. Most of these initiatives were behind the scenes, were done in confidence, because it's such a sensitive matter and it's so difficult in order to make progress in this. I think the one thing about the government after 1994, which is relatively unique, not absolutely unique, but relatively, is the fact that they maintain diplomatic relations with both sides, with the Palestinian Authority as well as with Israel, the Israeli government. And I think that created the opportunity for more types of dialogue between them or initiatives than other countries who are supporting the one or the other side only. And Aziz Pahad was very instrumental, I think, in forging these links and then also using them ultimately. We all know that a country like Egypt is one of the key countries when it comes to this matter. And I know that he sometimes also become involved in other Middle Eastern countries, as well as Egypt, Sudan even, and South Sudan, although it's not part of the Arab world, in order to be able to develop a network which he could use for his diplomatic initiatives.
Prof, the Pahad brothers, of course, have passed on in a matter of months between each other. And we've seen a lot of, family ties and siblings within, the struggle against apartheid. But both of them, both Isop and Aziz, were able to complement each other quite well. And it's rare to see that, isn't that in a liberation movement that you can find these families finding a way to coexist, because you'd always, from a personal perspective, there may be a sense of fatigue between both of them, but they really did find a way to work quite well, but also at the same time making sure that they could put personal problems or personal vendettas, whatever it may be, for a bigger cause.
Yes, I think they are possibly one of the best known sort of political families, if I can call it that way. Especially within the ANC, they were very prominent. His brother Pahad was, as we all know, was mainly in the office of the president, of President Mbeki. He played there a very important role in order to almost serve as a type of a prime minister for him during his administration, and did all sorts of problematic jobs for President Mbeki, while Aziz Pahad played that role as in a very sort of dedicated, strict way in the international relations. Pahad never really became involved in that. He was much more involved in domestic politics and the domestic issues. But as together, they certainly were very prominent and played a very decisive role during the time of first President Mandela, but even more during the Mbeki time.
Prof, thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
That's Professor Dirk Kotze from UNISA's Political Science Department, reflecting on the life of Aziz Pahad. He will be buried in Islamic rituals over this weekend. After the break, I'll be speaking to Imran Subrati from the United Ulama Council of South Africa. There is a survey that is occurring from the CRL Rights Commission on religious freedom, and UCSA is asking that all Muslims within South Africa participate in the survey. I'll be speaking to him after the break. Do stay tuned.